Darksiders Genesis is a whole ass game. Don't let the camera angle or the smaller price tag fool you. Darksiders Genesis is every bit the game as the first 3 games. In fact, it's longer than Darksiders 1 if you're being completionist about it. And it's just as gorgeous, interesting and compelling as all the rest. You just have to get over the camera angle. Which, unfortunately, so many people struggle to do. Including me. The behind the scenes of Darksiders Genesis is very weird. After Visual Games shut down, the team split up into 2 new studios. Crytek USA, which would go on to become Gunfire Games, and Airship Syndicate, founded by original creative director Joe Mad. Gunfire Games went on to make Darksiders 3, and Airship Syndicate, at the same time that game was in production, would go on to make Darksiders Genesis. Genesis came out just a year after Darksiders 3 because both projects were secretly in development at the same time. Both children of Vigil, both working on vastly different expressions of the series. It's a fascinating overlap because the 2 games couldn't be more different. And while it feels kinda mean to pick a favourite, Darksiders Genesis is the superior game, and that mostly comes down to ambition. Gunfire aimed high. They tried to make a AAA tier game with a third of the team and budget as Darksiders 2. And the result is a very messy and often broken game of high highs and low lows. Airship is half the size of Gunfire, but they aimed lower and as such created a much more consistent game. Genesis is not a AAA game. It's not really trying to be. It doesn't have any glossy CGI cutscenes, it doesn't have a big interconnected open world, it doesn't even have control of the camera. But these are deliberate cuts that allow Airship to focus on and refine the things that they're already good at, thanks to their previous work on games like Battle Chasers, another Joe Mad creation. Genesis does not reinvent the wheel, but it is a very nice, very polished wheel, and sometimes that's enough.
Do not mourn. Do not doubt. Your actions in Eden were tragic, but necessary.
Darksiders Genesis is a prequel to the rest of the series set millennia before the apocalypse, just after the slaughter of the Nephilim at the hands of the 4 Horsemen. It is the story of War and Strife's first mission after that to uncover and thwart a scheme being brewed by Lucifer, the King of Hell himself. While there are a few connections to the previous games, Genesis is its own story, entirely separate from anything happening in the last 3 games, aside from some familiar faces. And it's all the better for it, because Genesis does more for the world building of Darksiders than even Darksiders 2 did. It's also the first game to prominently feature more than one horseman, not counting Strife's strange inclusion in Darksiders 3. Genesis was built from the ground up to support 2-player co-op, with equal screen time and prominence between its 2 leads. Well, this can be seen as a strange choice because it means that Strife doesn't get the spotlight in his own game like the rest of the Horsemen. As a creative choice within Genesis, having 2 leads does wonders for the game. Even if you're not playing co-op, like me, because Strife and War are extremely different characters, and that contrast makes for an excellent buddy cop duo. War retains all of his qualities from the first game. As stubborn as a brick wall, extremely narrow-minded and focused on his mission. Strife fills another party role entirely. As the Team Ranger, he's the smallest and most nimble of the horsemen, but he's also the silly one, constantly cracking jokes, making quips, and generally making the effort not to take anything seriously. The contrast between War and Strife is what makes the game a great introduction to Strife, even if it isn't fully Strife's game. The quippy, goofy guy really needs a straight man to bounce off of to come across as vivid as he needs to. Strife is a wind-up merchant like any good big brother should be, and his teasing brings out both the best and worst in War. And, much like the previous games, Genesis ends up being a genre of game that fits Strife perfectly, albeit a bit accidentally. Like all the previous games, Genesis wears its influences on its sleeve, and despite what you may think, that influence is not Diablo. In fact, other than the camera, the game plays nothing like Diablo at all. No, the primary influence this time, cited in many interviews, was Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light, the semi-obscure isometric Tomb Raider spin-off for Xbox Live Arcade. As someone who's actually played, and quite liked that game, the influences are clear and apparent. In the way the Guardian of Light adapted the third-person action adventure of Tomb Raider to an isometric view, Genesis does the same for Darksiders. Genesis plays extremely similar to Darksiders 1. War actually controls identically to how he did in the first game, which is an impressive feat considering this is an entirely new engine. All of his button combos and big sword swings are exactly as they were, and he also carries over some of the same puzzle and traversal mechanics like the crossblade and the tremor gauntlet. Other than the perspective, going from Darksiders 1 to Darksiders Genesis, War feels exactly the same. But for that same reason, I prefer playing as Strife. Strife is designed entirely differently, because Strife is designed to play like a twin-stick shooter, shooting out streams of bullets and lots of different ammo types while dashing around and staying at a distance. The developers have always said that if Strife got his own game, it would probably be a first-person shooter, which would make a lot of sense, but in a way this makes even more sense because it feels more in keeping with the previous games. Together, the two of them make a balanced adventuring party, the big chunky tank and the nimble ranger. However, while that balance is clearly designed to accommodate co-op, it also makes the game uniquely interesting to play in single player. Which is good, because despite my best efforts, I can't seem to get any of my friends interested in Darksiders. One of the biggest failings of co-op games is that they're often completely unplayable or severely diminished without a co-op partner. Genesis is aware of this problem and implements several systems to counteract it. Rather than having a dedicated NPC partner, in single player you switch between Strife and War in a tag team system, and there's a bunch of upgrades and abilities tied to the system to encourage you to swap between them every so often. There are a bunch of puzzles that will require either War or Strife, or sometimes both, to solve. But more than that, once you get into the rhythm of it, there are certain encounters that are just better for either brother. If you're surrounded by a bunch of small enemies, then War can make mincemeat of them much faster than Strife. But if you're fighting a big single enemy, then Strife has the damage output and maneuverability to handle that much better. And because each character is pretty much playing a different genre of game, this mixing and matching keeps the gameplay fluid and interesting. You can also use the two characters to brute force hard encounters. When you die as one, you respawn as the other, giving you a second chance to finish the encounter, which makes total death and a return to a checkpoint pretty rare. And even if the other horseman doesn't die, whichever character you're not playing will regenerate health while you're not playing them, giving another incentive to switch things around. But the best system is the unlockable synergy abilities. This charges as you play, and when it's full it allows you to switch characters with a sweeping high damage ability, which can absolutely wipe the board if you time it right. The game is still clearly designed for co-op, and it is a little jarring to only have one brother on screen at a time, even when they're talking to each other. But these systems are very well designed to accommodate people who tend to prefer playing alone, like me. I can only hope that Darksiders 4 implements similar systems. Genesis uses the same system as Darksiders 1 for leveling up its characters. You find gear and upgrades as you explore, along with the ability to purchase them from Vulgrim, or a newly introduced acquaintance of Vulgrim, Dis, whose personality and design I enjoy way more than Vulgrim, so I hope she comes back. The one new thing Genesis adds is the surprisingly in-depth creature cores screen, which is a slightly complicated min-maxing system that's quite engaging once you figure it out. Matching different cores to the right slot for better bonuses to create builds. It's probably the closest to Diablo that the game actually gets, but it's still a very different sort of system. The game is much more about the minute-to-minute action gameplay than building up stats. Genesis's gameplay overall is exceptionally solid, with all the same core pillars as the previous games. Combat, exploration, and puzzles all laid out in more or less the same patterns as the previous games. Really, it is a third-person action-adventure game, just with a fixed isometric camera perspective, which can, unfortunately, be enough to ruin a game for some people. When I was studying game design, my level design professor always used to argue that giving players control of the camera was one of the worst mistakes game designers ever made. He has a lot of hot takes like that, he's a deliberately provocative guy, but this is a point he could very convincingly make. The camera is one of the most important and most versatile tools in a game designer's arsenal, but more importantly, a level designer's arsenal. If you control the camera, you control everything that the player sees. If you want them to see a hint for a puzzle, you can show them it. If you want them to see a vista, they have to look at it. Once you give control of the camera to players, you cede that ability. You can no longer guarantee that the player will look at the things that you want them to look at. The downside is that players want more control, always. If you limit that control, some people will throw up their hands in revolt. Genesis is a game that understands that a fixed camera is a strength and not a weakness. While its environments are not as grand or as naturalistic as Darksiders 2, they do look incredible. Genesis is the most vibrant, colourful and varied game in the series. Because the game is set far before the apocalypse, the game is instead mostly set within the various different realms of hell. each of which vary massively in colour and atmosphere, from deserts to icy abysses to ancient haunted crypts. A fixed camera means you only need to create things for the camera, not a full 360-degree window, which means you can focus on making the things within that camera as pretty as possible. This is why the isometric view was chosen. It limits the scope of the game in a way that empowers the designers. Airship could have made a third-person action game, but it would be half the size and much less impressive. It's these limitations that allow them to reach for a scope above and beyond what they could achieve in a traditional style. Similarly, the game uses chapters instead of a connected semi-open world like the previous games. The chapters are decently big, varied, and replayable straight from the hub, which is actually required for a completionist run because several upgrades are locked behind abilities you get in later chapters. Splitting the game into these smaller chunks allows the game to tell a more sprawling tale than the previous games, with the exception of Darksiders 2. I chafe against the fixed camera, against my better judgment. I would like to be able to zoom in and take a closer look, and I think I would enjoy the game more if I could look at it from a less fixed perspective. But that's a me problem. Everything the game does is a well-considered choice that allows the game to be the best version of itself that it can be within the limited scope and budget that the team had available to them. The perception of isometric action games has changed a bunch since 2019. Back when Genesis came out, the genre was mostly associated with either Diablo or a bunch of straight-to-mobile, mostly rubbish spin-offs like Halo Spartan Assault. Isometric action games are now a staple of the AA indie space, in large part thanks to a little game called Hades that was getting big right around the time that Genesis came out. Genesis is no Hades, it's not that good, but it's in a similar vein. Genesis truly doesn't feel like a spin-off. It's not quite a full sequel either, but it certainly doesn't feel cheap. The game looks much better than Darksiders 3 and is significantly less broken. It has a much more in-depth story than Darksiders 1, and it has gameplay more consistent than Darksiders 2. But even now, people still assume that it's little more than a spin-off game not really worthy of their time, purely because of the camera angle. It just doesn't look like a full game. Genesis isn't a big budget game, but it's not exactly an indie game either, and it's an interesting revelation of how industry standards shift into becoming the default. AAA action games are almost universally third or first person, but that's not a rule, it's just what everyone's been doing and therefore has become expected. Outside of noteworthy exceptions like Diablo or, I don't know, whatever the newest 2D Mario game is. But that's just a trend. Genesis tries to buck the trend, but ultimately the assumptions of its design are inescapable. It's a shame because these genre shifts are part of what makes Darksiders so interesting from a game design perspective. Every game in the series is different, they make different choices. As mentioned, they want to make an FPS one day, and why not? It would be unlike any other game in the series, but it would probably be pretty awesome. And that's really what the series is all about. The place where the isometric view really shines the most is in the boss fights, which are flat out some of the best boss fights in the series. Each major boss fight is counted as its own chapter to allow for quick replays, but they are exceptionally well designed and extremely cinematic. Take for example Belial, the same demon lord of Darksiders 2's DLC. Comparing his boss fight here to the one there is night and day. More abstract, but also way more cinematic and interesting to play than just whacking him into submission back in Darksiders 2. The most cinematic boss fight in the game, though, is a surprise. Part of Lucifer's plan involves breaking into Eden, now cut off and locked away after the massacre of the Nephilim. War and Strife follow through and are met with one of the darkest and bleakest sights in the whole series. The bodies of the Nephilim are piled so high they look like shrubbery, and the fires of the battle still burn all these years later. It's more evocative than any of the illustrations of the previous games could be of what a horrific act the Horsemen actually perpetuated here. Why death was so burdened by it back in Darksiders 2, and why Strife and War are so horrified by it in this game. And the music is just flat out one of the best tracks in the series. The music this time is all done by Gareth Cocker, and it's incredible. Cocker just gets the series and knows exactly what the music needs to sound like. It works with the visuals of the game to create an impressive sense of atmosphere for an isometric game. But this particular track gets even better. The dead start to rise and attack the horsemen, animated by a fallen angel, Astarte, who's like a centaur version of an angel and a griffin, and then the music kicks into high gear as you fight. This is Astarte's introduction and only role in the game, but the music, the location, and the history of the series is all she needs. She was assigned to guard this pile of burning corpses. No wonder she's a little resentful. No wonder she hates the horsemen. Who could look at this sight and not hate them? Certainly not themselves. It's where the abstraction of the isometric camera works best. War and Strife are a tiny part of the frame, yet they did this. This is their handiwork. This is what it looks like when all the demons you kill across the game don't disappear when they die. They are monsters. So is Astarte for bringing them back with necromancy, but well, that seems like the lesser crime of the two, doesn't it? Still, it's the most emotionally invested the brothers are in any of the boss fights, fueled by a horrible mix of righteous anger, grief, disgust, and guilt. It's a moment of environmental, mechanical, and just pure narrative storytelling that kind of surpasses anything in any of the previous games. It's just an expertly done little sequence. The game that Genesis really reminds me of the most is The Witcher Tales Thronebreaker, a truly excellent game doomed by genre expectations to always be more obscure than it deserves. But I suppose that's just what makes it an authentic Darksiders experience through and through. The relationship between War and Strife is the heart of the game, and this underlying shame and regret over what they did to the Nephilim is a key part of that. Not the only part, but a big one. They each have vastly different ways to deal with it, just like Death and Fury did, but because this plotpoint wasn't introduced until Darksiders 2, it wasn't a part of War's characterization until now. War's loyalty to the Balance, the Council, and his missions is in large part because of the guilt he feels over the massacre. He tries to find meaning in it. He has to find meaning in it. Has to believe that it was for a larger purpose. His loyalty to the Council is rooted less in truly trusting them or believing in their cause, but in guilt. He has to trust that his loyalty is worth something. Strife is not nearly so faithful. Even here, millennia before the grand conspiracies of the Apocalypse, he openly questions the Council's motives, much to War's annoyance. Strife copes with guilt and regret with his humour and his jokes. Genesis makes it more clear that the Four Horsemen are not truly siblings, or at least they weren't. All of the Nephilim are children of Lilith, but War and Strife didn't know each other before becoming horsemen. They're still relatively new to each other and don't know each other's secrets. Strife hints towards regrets he had before becoming a horseman. He wasn't a part of the Nephilim horde, he was a mercenary. He killed for fun. As big an amoral nihilist as Fury is at the start of Darksiders 3. He doesn't really feel worthy of being a horseman, feeling he was chosen for his skill more than any kind of noble purpose. But now he's stuck with it, one of the last Nephilim alive, and that changes one's perspective quite a bit. Strife does the Council's bidding not out of loyalty, but because he doesn't really know what else to do. He's purposeless, drifting along, trying his best not to think about all the people he's murdered, because even now, he still enjoys the violence just as long as he doesn't have to think about it. This is why I don't mind all his quips, because Strife is equally as depthful as all the rest, he just acts shallow to distract himself from all that. Being back in Eden shatters that facade, for a while anyway. In each chapter there's usually a spot where Strife and War will stand admiring the vista and having a little chat. Here in Eden, those chats keep coming back to the Nephilim, to what they did and how each character deals with it. War keeps trying to bury it, put it in the past and focus on the mission, but Strife is unable to do that. Neither is War, really, despite his best efforts. But this is, at least, a pain that they share, and it allows them to bond and build each other back up into something new, something different. Even if they can trust no one else, they can trust each other. War teaches Strife to be a little more serious and a little more focused. Strife teaches War how to let loose a little more and be a little less tense.
Being here again? After what we did?
What we did was necessary. The Nephilim's very existence was an affront to the Balance.
The Nephilim? You're talking like it wasn't our people we left in the ground here.
We are horsemen, 4 of us chosen among countless many. Absalom sealed the Nephilim's fate when he attacked Eden. Their end was inevitable, by our hand or another.
But it was by our hand. Sometimes I wonder if it was some kind of test. To see how far the Council could push us.
To test our loyalty.
Who knows? But for the record, I know you've got my back. And you better know I've got yours.
We ride together into oblivion!
It culminates with the final boss of the Eden chapters, Dagon, who was trying to cleanse Eden in a great storm and claim it for himself.
I guess we've been cleansed.
It's just a great little humanizing moment, similar to Death laughing at himself at the end of Darksiders 2. This whole thing is bleak, it's depressing, it's been constant reminders of their own crimes and failures. But it's also been absurd. They just killed a giant squid demon together, and sometimes you just need to laugh in the face of life's absurdities. From this point forward, the brothers no longer argue, despite what happens. They know they can trust each other and rely on each other, and there's a certain kind of power that comes with that. It's a really wonderful arc to watch unfold, and it's probably what makes me most excited for Darksiders 4, seeing that camaraderie on display for the whole family. The actual plot of the game is mostly a backdrop for exploring these various locations, killing a bunch of enemies, solving puzzles, and brotherly bonding. But the plot is at least compelling enough to link all of those things in a satisfying way. The previous games had already seeded Lucifer as the probable big bad of Darksiders 4, working behind the scenes to manipulate various events. Even in Genesis, he never appears directly, only working through his vassals and minions to concoct his schemes. For most of the game, it's unclear what that scheme actually is, only that he's given a bunch of lesser demon lords an excessive amount of power and then has essentially let them do whatever they want. This is how Samael gets involved. The lesser demon lord Moloch has seized and overthrown his realm with Lucifer's power, and so Samael works with the horsemen to help him get his throne back. As per usual, Samael knows a lot more than he's letting on, but he doesn't reveal that until the very end. Moloch is the final boss, and he is unfortunately a little underdeveloped, only showing up in the first and last chapters of the game. Especially frustrating because he's voiced by Keith David, and what do you mean you've cast Keith David only to make him a very small part of the actual game? Keith David on his own is enough to give this bit player way more gravitas than he would otherwise have. Moloch is a pawn who knows the game he's a part of and struggles against it, but is inevitably unable to do so. A tragic figure in a way, even though he's kind of an asshole. The truth is, each demon lord you kill had sold their soul to the devil to be claimed upon their deaths. Deaths that Lucifer knew would come as the council dutifully sent their enforcers to clean up the demon lord's various schemes. And now Lucifer has the power of all those souls. Samael knew this the whole time, of course. Lucifer offered him the same deal, but he is quite fond of his soul, so refused. He just also didn't care if the horseman played into Lucifer's hand as long as he could get his own realm back. Lucifer's plan, though, is abstract and a little petty. He uses the souls to create an animus which he uses to corrupt humanity, to give them free will. It's another little detail that builds on and subverts the Christian roots of the series. The Book of Genesis is, of course, the part of the Bible that tells the origin story of, well, everything. In the original story, a talking snake, presumably Lucifer, convinces Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, introducing sin to the previously perfect humanity. In Darksiders, he simply takes a more active role in that development. Tainting humanity with sin is an active spite against creation itself. But in his twisted way, Lucifer also views this as a gift.
Impressive, aren't they?
Speak of the devil.
The life these creatures knew before was meaningless. Whispering stories into the fire, searching the stars for answers to their pathetic existence. I am the answer. See how quickly they adapt? Now that their eyes are open, they feel everything their creator denied them. Fear, hatred, lust. Perhaps now they will create a third kingdom to be reckoned with.
Genesis does more work than any other game to set up Lucifer for Darksiders 4. Not that the devil really needs an introduction, but it gives a much better glimpse into his motives than any of the previous games, and what he might be trying to accomplish with all his schemes. Because while their methods clearly differ, the horsemen and the devil's goals might not be as different as the horsemen think. As we already know, the creator of this world is ambivalent at best. Lucifer is maybe not so wrong to resist such a figure. This is what makes Genesis such a good prequel. Even set millennia before the other games, it still feels connected to them because Lucifer is just playing the long game. And all of the events of Genesis still feel vitally important to an understanding of the greater story. The post-credits scene reveals that it was this act that led to the creation of the Seven Seals, and all the various treaties that the Council used to keep heaven and hell in check. An act of defiance that ended up being suspiciously beneficial for the Council more than anyone else. The layers of schemes and plots all start here, with Abaddon on one side, Samael on the other, and the Horsemen stuck in the middle. The stage is set. Let the games begin. Darksiders Genesis is not a very climactic end to this little critique series because Genesis is not an ending, it's a beginning. And I can only hope that someday I'm able to properly finish this series with a video on Darksiders 4. And also, hopefully Darksiders 4 doesn't suck, because that would really harsh my mellow, man. Darksiders is not my favourite franchise, but it has been one of the most interesting to talk about. A franchise of constant change and constant reimagining while always keeping the same extremely consistent story and lore throughout. As a student of game design, there were few adventures quite like a trip through Darksiders. Every game is a celebration of video games, all drawing proudly from their inspirations to nonetheless make something truly unique when they all come together. I would never say the games made me cry or made me rethink my life choices, but every single time they have made me say, damn, that was cool. And I think they'd be more than happy with that.
Listen thus. With the forging of these seven seals, a great treaty shall be wrought in the name of the balance. They who break it shall suffer the Horseman's wrath.
Let our will be manifest within the seals. 3 from the children of heaven, 3 from the dwellers below, and a final seal from our own wisdom.
The Council has spoken.
Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for your continued support. If you'd like to see your name up here or just support the things that I do, then please consider signing up. It would mean a lot to me, as well as a like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. This series hasn't been super popular with our own ancient horror that is the YouTube algorithm, but if you've made it this far, then you're a real one, so thank you very much. If you want to see my entire Darksiders series critique, then you can click this playlist up here. Or, if you want to learn about our upcoming actual apocalypse in the real world, then you can click this video down here. Both equally real apocalypses as far as I'm concerned.